Good morning, Matt Waldman. Coming off a delightful divisional round of playoff games. I'm sure you watched all of it instead of film because it's not like you have a rookie scouting portfolio to write. Oh, wait, you do. How's it going?
Pretty good, pretty good. I'm hopefully we'll be done with looking at wide receiver film early this week, and then I can move on to a couple of other positions here. We're closing in on about 120 players watched at this point, so everything seems to be working out for the April 1 release of the 20th edition of it. You can get it at mattwaldman.com. You can learn more about it there, and you can pre-order it at that point as well. And so we'll be giving away more RSPs in the near future. Thanks to Devin Knotts, he decided, he said, here, let's do some contests. And so we gave away a couple when we tried to Wally Pip old Bob Harris here. But he intimidated our guest Matt Harmon, and Harmon was like, no, I'm not, no, that's okay, I'm not going to do that.
I watched it. Harmon was not intimidated in the slightest, and he was perfectly fine. Probably could easily take my place. I detected lies in the initial opening there, at least one. You said you'll be done watching film. No, you won't. You'll be watching film forever until the day you expire. But that aside, I'm just for clarification, Matt Waldman likes to watch the films of football players. Always. But for this round of the RSP, everybody go get it. Check it out. New order system. Very smooth. Tested by me, Bob Harris. I can attest to it. It's very nice. So check it out. Get your order in and get that thing. It's like Christmas. It's like Christmas in April.
Hey,
it's fantastic.
I feel like Santa in January. So there we go.
All right. So let's start this out. And you know, if anyone watched the divisional games, we'll kind of touch on some of the things, mostly with teams that aren't moving forward, but a little bit on the others. But I just want to, you know, one of the others that is moving forward in the championship round, the Commanders did it based on a great performance by Jayden Daniels. So if you could start your own NFL franchise with the choice of 2024 rookie quarterbacks, Feeler, fuck it would be Jayden Daniels.
I feel it for most people, sure. I don't think there's a bad argument against him or a good argument against him, but I'd still take Caleb Williams, fuck it. And mainly because you just look at the teams. Washington did a fantastic job of setting up Daniels for success. Daniels has played well, as we can see that he has put that team on his back in key moments to be able to bring them back and make the plays that he needs to make. So from that front, I would say, that you look at the production, you look at everything that he's done. At the same time, when you look at Caleb Williams, this was just kind of what I thought was going to happen in the when I did the RSP last year. Not when I started getting into the hyper reactionary mode that everybody's in fantasy. I try to limit that as much as possible too. But looking at it post draft, I thought, well, this is going to be the toughest position for a quarterback to be in. Probably that in New England, and I felt like that Williams was the best equipped to handle the apocalyptic nature of what he was going to be entering in Chicago, and I think that bared out, pun intended, and
68 sacks would suggest yes, this was a trial for him just in general. It's coaching changes, offensive coordinator changes, all the above. But I think this is why I asked the question. We're all going to look at what Jayden Daniels does, where he is in his progression, or the Commanders are in their progression as a team with him. I think this says more about the NFL than it does about the quarterback in general. You get a new GM, a new coach, get a great draft pick, and you too can join the postseason, the sweepstakes, kids. And it could have easily have been the Bears with some differences. But I do want to narrow in. Like you mentioned, the Drake Maye, or you hinted at Drake Maye. We'll talk about him in a minute. Michael Penix Jr., we didn't get a good look at. Maybe he is, somebody is. But Bo Nix was the other one who came to mind, who probably far exceeded. And I think those are the guys that probably are going to have our attention right now from a fantasy perspective, is the guys that far outperformed expectations, and that is Daniels and Nix. Should we take lessons from what we saw from C.J. Stroud this year versus his rookie year with both these players?
Yeah, I definitely think that's possible. Or Baker Mayfield after his first
Correct.
great half of his season. We have to understand that opponents often catch up to the tape of rookie quarterbacks, and they start to implement things that are a little bit different. This is why scouts always say 18 to 30 games is probably what you really want to look at to see what you have in a player. And you're oftentimes going to see some of these quarterbacks get tested in ways that they weren't tested in year one. And while Daniels I would say, I went from being, I think Jayden Daniels can be a starting quarterback in the league, but I'm still, I would say I was a little more sober in recommendations. Like he
Sure.
and Bo Nix were essentially scored the same in my top 5. And I looked at both and said, yes, scoring wise, they both could be starting quarterbacks. Whereas I saw Daniels saying, I'm going to be a little more sober than the crowd. Nix, I'm a little more excited than the crowd about what he could be. But they're kind of like two sides of the same coin from that perspective. So I think looking at it, you just have to understand if offensive line play takes a little bit of a hit, it could dramatically change the outcomes of how this player is performing, and it can dramatically change the reactionary nature that people have about the quarterback, because that tends to be the case. We saw that with Stroud, which
Right.
we'll talk about more later.
I think, like, is it safe to say that, like, all these players that are going in the first round, and we're going to talk about the wide receivers here in a minute. I mean, the differences end up being, for the most part, I mean, they're all very good, right? And so we're splitting hairs at the top level guys, but it's the circumstances they land in. It's the combination of offensive line, coaching staff, supporting cast, schedule. Like, so many things go into it. The differences are minute.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think what happens is that, most people, again, get more excited about production year one as opposed to the context of how they're producing,
Right.
what the performance really is. And so that's why, and then they cling on to certain metrics to try and get a deeper look at that, which can be helpful. You look at somebody like Harmon's work with reception perception, and you can at least learn a little bit about the results of what their route running is doing, which gives you a little bit of deeper
Right.
look than receptions, yards, and touchdowns. But still, you want to look at how they're being used, and what techniques they're doing that are working well and what they're not. Because one of the things I think that Matt Harmon highlighted last week that was good was he said, he brought up Marvin Harrison. One thing that his work will give you context about is that he was used in the sacrificial X role, kind of basically a very limited type of route running role, and how he was targeted. At the same time, one of the things that Matt mentioned that he said, basically said I kind of just wrote off and said it's not going to be as big of a deal was the drops, because it's the specific nature of the drops that was worrisome. Whereas, like, he looked at it and said, well, drops, when you just run it through the numbers, on average, they don't matter as much. But he was like, this year, for this particular context, they matter very much. And I think that's an example of sometimes when you're watching the film, you want to have a good process about how you do it and what you're looking for, but at the same time, that's gonna help you understand some of these contexts in a way that you can frame it for people to understand whether it's important or not. And I think
many of the regular listeners of this podcast will think this is punishment for Matt trying to Wally pit me with Matt Harmon last week, that I'm basically running a Jayden Daniels victory lap. That's not what I'm doing here. I don't have my track shoes on. What I am, and it might be a Bo Nix victory lap. I think going forward, like, if you thought everything, if you play it out, like, Bo Nix might be in a better circumstance than any of these players in terms of the coaching, but in terms of the supporting cast, we'll have to see. Maybe it's Michael Penix Jr., a Matt Waldman, who told us all along. Maybe this will end up being a victory lap for one Matt Waldman before all is said and done.
I think there's victory laps for pretty much the whole quarterback class. I would say that from Penix to Williams, and Penix, Williams, Daniels, Maye, and Bo Nix, I think if you picked one of them, you should have a victory lap there. And they were all guys that, when I graded them out, at least they were all guys that you could look and say, yeah, they can become quality starters in the league. We'll see if that holds up by the end of year 2.
This is my real point. Pay attention on draft day, people. Where they go is going to matter a little bit. If you could start your own NFL franchise with a choice of 2024 rookie wide receivers, 100% is Malik Nabers. Feel it or fuck it.
I'm feeling that, but I would understand if people are all like Brian Thomas, certainly
those people would be wrong.
No, Lad McConkey,
I think that's the interesting part of this equation here, though, is maybe the next guys on the list aren't the next guys on the list, right? Yeah. I mean, I think that's the key here.
Yeah, but I mean, with Nabers, come on, it's the same. It's the same consistency that I would have with Caleb Williams. Is that the argument for him? Is that Malik Nabers played on a craptastic offense, and while yes, that means that he's going to get fed more targets, it also means that they have to be imaginative in getting it to him, and it still means that he played with 3 different quarterbacks. I think it was 3. I want to say 4, but he played with more than one quarterback, 4 quarterbacks, and none of them performed extraordinarily well. So
there was 4.
Yeah. So for the fact that he did that, and to me, again, it's the same thing I said last week to Harmon. I was like, if you're going to equate it with staying in shape, you could look at Brian Thomas, you could look at Lad McConkey, and you could say, well, they were in a good facility. They had a good trainer. They had proper weight training and good nutrition. And Malik Nabers would be the equivalent of the dude in the prison yard doing burpees and eating things that you would not have any business eating, probably in the prison cafeteria. But that's all you got, And I would say from that perspective, maybe he had it a little bit harder, even though you could say the targets were going to come.
I will say this should be a victory lap for Matt Waldman. He should take many victory laps. The child prodigy, Lad McConkey, was phenomenal, something that Matt has been stressing all along. And when he grows up, he's going to be something special. I tell you that. If you could start your own NFL franchise with either Brock Bowers or Trey McBride, it would be Bowers. Feel it or fuck it.
I'm feeling that. But it's close. It's close because I think, as we've talked about this in the past, Trey McBride should probably be one of the top 2 to 3 producers every week at that position, because I think he has almost everything Bowers has, just maybe not quite the explosion, but his explosion is better than average among that tier of starters. I think Bowers is just probably has that little bit extra, and considering that he also was on a team that essentially fell apart during the season, at
3
least
quarterbacks.
Yeah, he had 3 quarterbacks. They lost Devontae Adams, so there was even more pressure on trying to get him the ball.
The worst thing you could have in the world.
Oh, there we go. Oh. Yeah, Bob is stomping on shares as Amir White right now. But yeah, I mean, it's like you got that. You kind of have the ups, and you kind of have a lot more lows than what you have with Kyler Murray, which was just kind of like mediocre to bad, in terms of where Murray went, which was basically let me hold on to the ball and it's my ball, kind of mentality. Whereas I think, with at least the Raiders, they were trying to get the ball to Bowers and they succeeded. I would say if I wanted more block, I would say still it's close, but in every realm. And I'd be very happy with McBride, but I'm feeling Bowers. How about you?
I feel Bowers as well. Like when you look at him, he does not look the part, right? But man, until he gets on the field, it's just an interesting. He's an interesting player. Every time I watch him, he's got that vibe that he is the best player on the field vibe, and I like that. Mike Vrabel and his choice of offensive coordinator in New England are less important than the personnel when it comes to fulfilling Drake Maye's potential. Feel it or fuck it, Matt Waldman.
I'm feeling that because I think that we've seen with Maye, it's not like that he had a great offense around him. And I would say he's the type of player that, in terms of what he can do, unless you're going to ask him to run, a Michael Vick-like offense or a Lamar Jackson-like offense under Greg Roman, and even that, where you're going to ask him to run a ton, then I would say no. I think Maye's a good scrambler. He's someone who can get you yards with his legs, but he's not in that realm of a threat. I think he'll be able to adapt to it and do just fine. Right now, the most important thing isn't the scheme. It's going to be whether the offensive line could protect him. Because again, if we look at Williams, once they limited the sacks, at least in the first 3 quarters of games, with Thomas Brown with the short passing, the numbers went up significantly. Even with just that small adjustment. I think the same is the case with Drake Maye. Keep the offensive line, make the offensive line better, and you're going to be in better shape. That's the highest priority. I'd be drafting offensive line pretty much. I'd be adding free agents on offensive line. I'd be drafting offensive line, and I would just deal with the receivers that you've got right now.
So if you were Mike Vrabel, would you fight Chicago's new coach for offensive linemen, feel it or fuck it?
Yeah, I would. And if I were Mike Vrabel, I'd probably sneak into Chicago and see if I could disable if I could sneak attack the Chicago staff. But I don't think you're going to need to do that because based on their track record, they're probably going to shoot themselves in the foot.
Just along those lines, if you're a new coach and you're looking at the New England opening with Drake Maye, you're looking at the Chicago opening with Caleb Williams, both have needs on the offensive line. I'd say the Patriots' needs probably greater than that. But how much, would playing in the AFC East be way more appealing than the NFC North right now? Or maybe not with Buffalo sitting atop there? Where are you at on those divisions?
I mean, I think that they're both difficult divisions, and certainly there's a lot of offensive firepower in the NFC North. I'd say the AFC East is one of those where Miami's kind of in flux. Their fortunes could change dramatically, even though they're still a tough team. And then you look at the Jets. That's a whole other matter. I would still probably rather be in the AFC East at this point, but I'd say I'd rather be in the NFC than the AFC in terms of if I had a chance to build a good team, because I think the AFC is a tougher playoff. As
I framed that question, I'm thinking, well, in the end, yes, it's probably the answer is AFC East for now, but then in the end, you're going to have to play whoever else is the top of the AFC, and that's going to be a battle. Dallas, the Cowboys, they'll have a new coach. Will that new coach have an elite quarterback? Feel it or fuck it. Is Dak Prescott elite?
I think he can put up elite numbers, but he's not quite elite. And I think that he's just one of those very good players. Like you'd say, Matt Ryan, I didn't think was an elite quarterback in his heyday, but he was capable of elite numbers because he had strong players around him. And I think Cowboys, the frustrating thing about the Cowboys is that when everybody's healthy, their offense is close and capable of some of that, but not quite there. And so when it doesn't work, you've got disappointed fan base, and expectations are high pretty much every year, and then the rug gets pulled out from under him. But I think Dak Prescott is more than good enough. He doesn't need to be elite for people to be excited about him being your quarterback.
Next head coach in Jacksonville will be the key that finally unlocks Trevor Lawrence. Feel it or fuck it.
If he's bringing offensive line play, yes.
That's always the answer.
That is
true.
I hate to not give it interesting answers, but offensive line is pretty much it with that, because when you look at Trevor Lawrence, he has moments, and I think maybe there's more to it than that. But I would say if the argument is offensive line or Trevor Lawrence getting unlocked, I would say really it's probably 97% offensive line and 3% situational plays with Trevor Lawrence, that if he had better offensive line play every week, we might see him gain that small gap between good and excellent. And I think otherwise you're asking him to kick waves, and
we've seen the door cracked. We've seen him kind of kick it in a little bit, and maybe to the deadbolt, you get past to the to the next level. We've seen good performances this series. We know that's there, but I'm with you. But Brian Thomas Jr. Will be helpful in this regard. That's kind of a building block, I think. Yeah, I think if you have Lawrence and you have Brian Thomas Jr.,
yeah,
you have some building blocks there to work around. And there's a piece or two on the offensive line too, but they definitely, that's the key. Well, the Raiders will have a new coach. This looks like a total rebuild beyond Brock Bowers. Is there a piece here to build around?
You know, Amir Abdullah, Max Crosby. You know,
I think that's it.
You know, Max Crosby would probably be the piece. You know, and I think that's essentially it. I mean, I'm sure there's some underrated players that are helpful to the franchise, but I think that when you're looking at it, those are your two pieces right now.
New Orleans will have a new head coach, but almost certainly the same quarterback. That's Derek Carr. Fuck it. Derek Carr is a limiting factor for this offense.
I feel it, but I would say for the purposes of how people are going to take it, I'm going to say fuck that. And the reason being is that right now you need to just focus on having a good enough offense for any quarterback to play in. And I would argue with this team that if you put Sam Darnold in there, we might see more Derek Carr-like results with Sam Darnold than what we saw from this year in Minnesota. Until you get the line straightened out, and I would say the big thing about Carr is that he pisses off his receiving corps.
Or the family of his receiving corps, said Chris Olave's family.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Carr is one of those guys that he's not as popular among the players as he should be, but can that change and things be a little rosier? Sure. I mean, Baker Mayfield got that kind of had that kind of reputation on his way out the door in Cleveland. And some of that was deserved too, and he figured it out. I think with Carr, though, he's been in the league too long. I don't think he's going to have any sudden revelations. You know, this isn't going to be like this. He's not the Scrooged of quarterbacks. We'll put it that way.
One word answer. It's a number. What round are you drafting Chris Olave in this year?
5th, 6th, yeah.
Wide receiver 2 to 3, kind of low end 2, high end 3, with the room for potential to be more if they actually. That's
where I'd start in June. As like a mid to low range wide receiver 2.
The Jets will have a new head coach and general manager. Let's say I'm the head coach and you're the general manager. Feel it or fuck it. Are we keeping Aaron Rodgers?
I think we're gonna have a fight. I'm keeping Aaron Rodgers, yes. And the reason I'll make is this: is if he wants to play, he'll be a full year removed from, more than a year removed from the Achilles. I think there were a lot more issues with this team than just Aaron Rodgers, and I think people, again, they get upset. They allow their feelings about Aaron Rodgers off the field, whether it's his politics or what he talks about, and the kind of lightning rod that he has been, for some things that are true and some things that really aren't. I watched like the Netflix Enigma, the show on Rodgers, and I kind of came away from that where I just felt like, okay, if you didn't like Aaron Rodgers after watching that, it's not going to change your mind.
You're still not going to like Aaron Rodgers.
You're still not going to like Aaron Rodgers. But I also felt like it gave a accurate depiction of how the media is with celebrities. And I felt like that if you liked the media, I don't think most people do, but if you like the media and then you watch that, you probably would go, yeah, not so much, because even legit media, sometimes the way things function, you saw kind of the gaps in what's there. And I mean, as someone who's worked in media, I would say that was the thing that turned me off of it, is that you can be following if you follow the rules, the way the media does things, the way reporting is, if you follow the rules, sometimes you can still get yourself into situations where you have mischaracterized the person, and
Correct.
I think that's what has happened with him.
If you hurt the media's feelings, or they decide they don't like you, expect to swim upstream the rest of your life, and that's where Aaron Rodgers is. Actually, we're not going to argue on this one. I think I feel exactly the same. If I was the Jets and I know I'm going to have to find a new quarterback in the future. I don't know that you're going to find a better bridge quarterback than Sam Darnold or Joe Flacco or whoever becomes available. And I agree with you as well. A year removed from that injury might be the year we need. And he also agreed that he wasn't solely responsible for some of the issues.
So that means you and me in a safe house somewhere in New York, because we're probably the only two people who
in the darkness.
Yeah, okay, because we're the only.
Ayahuasca.
There we go, because we're the only. I think we're the only two people that may feel that way.
I agree with that. Can the Lions of Detroit, a horrible loss for them, 5 turnover game, or just what a mess. Can they overcome the potential departures of both coordinators? Aaron Glenn, very popular. Ben Johnson seems almost certain to go, although you hear the discussion, it's like, depending on who you listen to. And look, agents are out there telling people things because you're hearing the same things from many different people. The Raiders are suddenly high on his list. The reason being, like, I think last time we talked, we may have said, like, is he going to go quarterback shopping? Turns out maybe he's more interested in GM shopping. It turns out the Raiders have an opening there and he might have a say in it. But we'll see how that plays out. But for the Lions, the pieces we're interested in, can they overcome the departure of Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn if he goes away? Apparently the Commanders were like, Aaron Glenn wasn't all that important.
Yeah, I think they can. And I think that's mainly it's because really it's Dan Campbell's show. I know that those guys handle the details, but it's the GM and Dan Campbell's, Holmes and Campbell's, basically their collaboration on this and them being on the same page about what they want to hire, who they want to bring into the organization, and what the culture's about and the quality of players that they add. And so I think this is a case where when you look at the players, people like to say, oh, they just they got these great geniuses in the plans of what we do, and the players don't really matter that much. They just made the players good. Jared Goff wasn't any good. People will say that, especially after the game that he had. David Montgomery wasn't really all that good, and then he came there. Look at what Jamal Williams did. And then when he left, he didn't do anything. They're gonna talk about players on that level, but I think it's
correct.
I don't think that's quite true. I think it's more that the players make the scheme, and as long as the scheme isn't awful. And I think that Campbell and the GM Holmes have earned the equity for us to say they're going to overcome this with the talent that they have.
I would agree with that. You and I are like the Holmes and Campbell of this podcast, or maybe the Quisio, Adolfo Menso, and Kevin O'Connell of this podcast, or maybe the D'Amico Ryans, Nick Casario of this. Okay. So the candidates, I feel like Dan Campbell's probably been. Johnson has only been interviewing for like 3 years now. So you have to think they have a plan in place to plan and player, the people involved, Tanner Engstrad, kind of tight end, passing game coordinator there, Scotty Montgomery, the running backs coach there, Hank Fraley, the offensive line coach there, have all been mentioned as possible. Also, probably possible offensive coordinators for Johnson, Ben Johnson. If he goes somewhere, him stealing one of those guys to take with him is not out of the question. So that'll be something to watch. And we'll be watching Aaron Glenn. I'm sure there will be candidates there as well on staff to replace him. So we'll see. Though I would expect we'll be hearing some things about those guys fairly soon. Now that they're out of contention, but it will be interesting to see. But I think the bigger point for fantasy managers, you are correct. Feeling Matt Waldman's point here is Dan Campbell probably is responsible for the Sam Brad Holmes as anybody else. We talked about C.J. Stroud, showed a lot of grit in the loss to Kansas City, but it was a tough season. He didn't come close to duplicating his success as a rookie. Was this year an outlier, or was the first season the outlier?
I think they were both outliers. I think that's what I'm feeling. Is that last year. I heard the narratives with the Ohio State Georgia game, then the bowl game, or where people were like, "Oh my God, we saw a dimension of C.J. Stroud that we've never seen before. He's literally Trevor Lawrence in his ability to move. He's he's not Jalen Hurts, but oh my God, he can move." And I remember watching that game and going, "What brand of crack is everybody on?" I remember literally watching that game and to studying it and going, okay, people don't watch football. He moved more, sure, But this wasn't anything out of the range of what he really did. I just thought if you watch the rest of his career carefully, you would just go, C.J. Stroud is a Matt Ryan-esque type of mover, which is better than you would expect, but not as good to feel like that you're going to get tons of yards. He's going to need a good pocket around him. And when that pocket deteriorates, especially this year, the pocket deteriorated not only off the edges, but also in the middle. And when you get constant pressure up the middle, that's more damaging than edge pressure. So, I laugh. I always laugh because people are like, we need tackles. Tackle is one of the most important parts of the offensive line. And the draftniks are all about, and teams too, are all about, you can get a guard later, you can get a center later. And the reason that is, and I understand it, is that the athletes aren't as rare at those positions. So the rarity of like the difference between a good and a great player at those positions is much starker at tackle. But I would say good teams still often draft centers in the first round. Still, the Eagles, look at the Eagles and what they've done. I would say that it worked out okay. And their center guard combination in Houston really gave up a lot of interior pressure. So
it was tough.
When you have that, I don't care how good you are. Caleb Williams had that. CJ Stroud had that. When those things happen, it just ruins a quarterback's ability to even start off on a solid basis. And when that pressure's constant, your game's going to deteriorate over time. So and then on top of it, Nico Collins was there part of the season. All their receivers were there part of the season.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So they could.
Same last year, though. He was. It was the cast rotated due to injuries, but there wasn't players that stepped up to the degree they did last year and come through huge games.
Yeah. Noah Brown. Look at what Noah Brown did in the playoffs.
Correct.
And them figuring out how to use Noah Brown a little bit compared to like Noah Brown sitting there on the bench, 3-4 deep, and go, oh yeah, we can pull this guy off, and he's that's good. So yeah, I would say he's not as bad as he looked to some people this year. He was not quite as good as he looked in year one, and I think that that's a lesson for any of the quarterbacks that were rookies in 2024. That C.J. Stroud is a good lesson for that.
Looking at the week 1 through 17 numbers, Joe Mixon was running back 13 on the season. He was running back 6 in points per game. Joe Mixon, should he be a running back 1 next year?
Yeah, mainly because he can handle the volume. I think for the most part, he gets dinged up, but then he comes back and he's still able to handle the volume. Yeah, he's a good all-around player. I don't think they're going to find any. Maybe they find somebody in this draft who can help spell him. But it's going to be more like the James Conner, Trey Benson thing. Who? Trey Benson? Oh, wait. People were talking about him taking over for James Conner by midseason. And then there are a bunch of running backs that people thought that way about, that it just didn't happen. And I think Joe Mixon is going to be one of those guys that will fight off a running back for another year.
Just like Kyren Williams did with Blake Corum. And Kyren Williams finished the season as running back 7 on the year, a little lower in points per game, but still well inside the top 10. Is he going to be drafted as a running back 1 next year at Matt Waldman's teams?
Probably. I'm starting to accept that he might be the Priest Holmes of this generation, which means that, though I think Holmes was a better player, but I think Williams has demonstrated and proved his mettle. And I love Blake Corum. And it is just a dinged up game or two away from Blake Corum being able. If there's a player that can Wally Pip Kyren Williams, another running back in this class, it's going to be Blake Corum over Kyren Williams. But I'm not.
No Wally Pippin around here, motherfucker.
Yeah, I'm not. But I'm not holding my breath for Blake Corum to be doing that with Kyren Williams next year.
All right, fair enough. Cooper Kupp. Been a rough run for him. It's Matt Waldman's teams. Will you be investing, feeling Cooper Kupp as a wide receiver 3 next year, or fuck it?
Probably regretting it, but I would probably do it just from the standpoint of I think that's a reasonable expectation for him, because Cooper Kupp, it's one of those. He's one of those types of players that I look at him as kind of like Adam Thielen. In the right circumstances, he can still give you strong starter production, and it's probably going to his career's probably going to play out longer and drag on longer than the people whose formulas tell us that they won't.
Right. I tend to agree with that, and I may let somebody else be the hero on that one, go younger, but I do think it's going to be tempted to take him. What about Travis Kelce, ending the season? Well, heading into the postseason with a huge game. Does he have another regular season of high end production? Look, he finished inside the top 5 this year. Was perfectly suitable. Maybe not what we invested in him to be, but does he have another season of high-end production in a position where there aren't a lot of guys capable of high-end production?
See, I think there are a lot of guys capable of high-end production, but it just was
pick which week.
It was just a difficult scenario this year for that to come to fruition. Because if you said Sam Laporta could rebound, I think people believe that. If you said T.J. Hawkinson, who missed half the season because of his ACL tear, do you think he could rebound? I think people would probably agree with that. David Njoku, if he actually has a quarterback, could he rebound?
Evan Ingram.
He could do that. Evan Ingram, he could rebound. So I'm kind of more. And then there's the everlasting question of Kyle Pitts. Was he healthy enough? And could he possibly rebound?
That guy.
I know most people feel that way, but I still think that there's enough players there that. If you're drafting Travis Kelce as a low-end tight end 1, or if he somehow falls from the aegis to high-end tight end 2, then yes, he can have another season of high-end production, and you're drafting him at a place where I think it's safe to make that investment. But I think that if you're going to draft him over the top 4 to 6 players, that in terms of where you add a little bit of youth into the formula, then no, I would say that's not where you want him.
The Pittsburgh Steelers, they're going to hang on to Mike Tomlin, not trade him away. Teams are calling. He's going nowhere. He's a volunteer, not a hostage. Justin Fields and Russell Wilson are currently on the roster, but they are not under contract, I don't believe, past this year. Feel it or fuck it. Justin Fields will be the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2025, Matt Waldman.
I'll say, God, I don't know. I'm going to say, just for fun, I'm going to say, fuck it. Skylar Thompson's going to be the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Only quarterback under contract.
He's the only quarterback under contract. But no, I mean, I think that Fields will get his chance. Yes, I think.
Do you think Russell Wilson should return? Do you think they should retain both those guys?
Yes, based on what we saw this year, I think Justin Fields is. I think it's going to be harder for Justin Fields to improve what he needs to improve upon conceptually as a player than what it will take for the Steelers to improve what they need to improve around Russell Wilson. I think Wilson played good enough, and there's not much in the. I think if they want to compete again this year in 2025, I think he's their best chance to get to the playoffs and win in the playoffs. Even though he's maybe not quite the same player he was, but to give him a full year with this team, and I actually think that he could be a little bit better. And
assuming
with
he
Arthur
sticks
Smith.
around,
yeah.
Assuming he's a volunteer. George Pickens. Speaking of hostages versus volunteers, I'm not sure where George Pickens falls into that. I'm leaning towards the hostage category. Will he be a Pittsburgh Steeler in 2025?
I'm going to say no, and I think that because the Steelers, I think, have very little tolerance for unprofessional behavior.
Well, no, they have a high tolerance for unprofessional behavior when it's super productive. I don't think 900 yards is productive enough for that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Like Antonio Brown, you look over time, the guys that they tend to put up with guys while they're being productive. Deontay Johnson. Once they get tired of the diva quote, who was the USC receiver? That they moved. No, the big guy, Chase.
Oh, Chase Claypool, Notre Dame.
Claypool.
Notre Dame.
Oh no,
yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought he was USC.
No, that was Juju. Juju was from USC, Notre Dame. Claypool was from Notre Dame.
I mean, you heard the talk, the diva quotient with him early on, and the fights in the parking lots and whatnot. So it seems like they're willing to put up with that as long as they're getting some production. I've heard stories. Okay. I've heard stories of Antonio Brown's behavior from the times before we heard about it that the Steelers obviously didn't want us to hear about, because why? He was the best receiver in football. Once he wasn't that, it gets time to move on. I feel like they're willing to move on once they get what they want.
I just thought it was the fact that the best way for me to convince Vince Hugo to go out in the snow last week was to say, listen, George, we're not Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers here. We're Cleveland Browns fans or Baltimore Ravens fans here. We're going to play in the snow. And
there he is.
And there he is. He saw, and he knew. I mean,
no.
And then when he saw the deer outside with the George Pickens jersey on, he knew that he needed to go back outside.
George Pickens will fight you over that. Look, I do think you need to be more productive if you're going to be that much of a hassle for a team. We've seen the Steelers kind of. I think when you have Mike Tomlin, you're set up with a coach who is probably capable of dealing with these things pretty well in-house. I think they've done that in the past, but also I know for a fact, talking to people who are involved, that they did not necessarily deal with Antonio Brown as much as they just kept it on the down low. So that's maybe part of the handling here. It's hard with George Pickens, the way he struggles to keep it in line during games. I think it's detrimental to the team. The penalties and the post game press conference. Is this offense getting better? Nah. I mean, just like doesn't seem to be super interested. I'm with you. I think he'll move on, and hopefully, learn some lessons and come away with, because he's a super talented player, and hopefully he can be value for us. And that's how I feel about him. Fuck that.
Yeah. If they can trade him for a veteran that maybe is a little more reliable behind the scenes, that could be helpful.
I will say one thing though: they've always had someone coming along. I don't know if Roman Wilson is the guy that's laying in wait. They tend to have somebody waiting that's been developing or turning into something.
Maybe, but he had a lot to learn. So, and they were expecting him to produce immediately, and I thought that was probably an example of why we don't want to logo scout pro teams about their ability to develop players, because while they've had past with some good guys, those guys were good and had a better talent profile coming out. I thought that Roman Wilson was a guy that I thought that would